Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome from Geneva, and welcome to the third event in the series on reflections on digital future from Geneva. Today's event will be dedicated to the issue of artificial intelligence and health. Just as a reminder, in the series, we already covered two other events, one dealing with data economy and the previous one on environment and artificial intelligence and digitalization. Today, we will be speaking about health. This is an event series that is happening in partnership with excellent partners. So we are working together with the Permanent Mission of Slovenia here to the UN in Geneva, who, as you are aware, is currently holding the EU Presidency. We are working together with the EU Delegation to the UN also here in Geneva and with the Permanent Mission of Switzerland. We are also very pleased and proud to be working together in cooperation with IRCAI for this particular event. So once again, thank you and welcome. My name is Teresa Horeisova from the Geneva Internet Platform, and I will be your moderator for today's session. We have a second moderator, my colleague Andriana Gavrilovic, who is joining us from Belgrade, and she will be monitoring the chat and making sure that all of the inputs that you have or questions that you might have to our speakers are being brought back to the plenary. So with that, I really encourage you to use the chat and to be very active, because kind of the direction in which this event will unfold will very much depend on you. Now, as a little introduction to this event, you know, maybe you have noticed some changes in your behavior. You might have noticed that maybe your smartwatch has prompted you to stand up and take some steps. Maybe your heart is a little bit elevated than normally, and you have this information thanks to the technology. You might want to up your vitamins intake. Or maybe during the pandemic, you have tried telemedicine and consulting your physician online. So these are, of course, some of the significant changes that digital technologies are bringing to healthcare, and I believe that we will cover some of them in today's event. Then there is a whole new field on how artificial intelligence can be used to help us in diagnosis, monitoring population health, and so on. I would like my colleagues to put up a little infographic, you know, that shows what are all of the possible applications of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And I would also give you a few little data or information that we found in preparation for this event. For instance, okay, sorry about that, little technical intermezzo. According to 7 tablets, it takes 1.2 seconds for artificial intelligence to screen a CT scan, which is 150 times faster than it would take a physician. In the United States, as an example, 75% of consumers do consider tech as very important for health management. So clearly we are observing some shifts. And not only these questions will be discussed in this hybrid event with our excellent speakers. So I said hybrid because we have a combination of speakers joining us here on site and online. And I will start with the online speakers. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andreas Alois Reis, who is the co-lead for Global Health Ethics team at the Division of the Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization. Good afternoon to you, Andreas. We have furthermore with us Mr. Amandeep Singh Gill, who is the CEO and Director of the International Digital Health and AI Research Collaborative, IDAIR, here in Geneva. Good afternoon to you, Amandeep.
Good afternoon.
We have with us also online Dr. Vida Groznik, who is a researcher at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia and assistant professor at University of Primorska. And she's the CEO of Neus Diagnostics. Good afternoon to you, Vida. I will continue with another online speaker, who is Mrs. Ulrike Till, Director for IP and Frontier Technologies Division at the World Intellectual Property Organization. Good afternoon to you. And finally, here with me in Geneva, Professor Catherine Holloway, who is the Professor and Academic Director at the Global Disability Innovation Hub at the UCL in London and Program Committee Chair for AI and Assistive Technologies in the International Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, IRCAI, one of the partners for this event. So I would like to open this discussion with short kickoff questions to each of our speakers. And I will reshuffle the order a little bit, and I would like to start with Amandeep. So Amandeep, your center set up in Geneva looks a lot at the kind of global trends on combining technology and health. How fast are these developments actually, and what are the main trends that you would like to bring up as kind of setting the scene for our discussion today?
Thank you. That's a great question to start us off with. The trends are accelerating. So there's greater investment, greater attention pouring into the digital health domain. Technology meets health domain. Technology has always been part of the health domain. You know, we have very advanced industrial capabilities, but digital data and AI are kind of new aspects of the technological dimension. In our survey of the globe, so we'll be launching a global research map this month, in fact. So we looked at data over the last 10 years across 9 regions of the globe. And then there is some recent data from the pandemic response. And that's telling you 3 things. First, the rise of the telemedicine paradigm to provide access to healthcare, to provide triage and filtering through the health systems to larger number of populations. It's still unfolding, but there's a lot of potential for improving access. The second is the use of data and AI for the public health response. So estimating the spread of the pandemic, the burden on the health system is just 2 examples, but the data awareness, the AI awareness is just rising. And Israel has shown how large data sets can be used to accelerate the assessment of the vaccine rollout or drugs rollout, etc. The third trend is the use of AI and big data in science related to health. You know, a place where we are quite active, science collaborations. So you see with GIZ how the genomic sequences were shared digitally, enabled the early rollout of vaccines. You see the private sector moving in a big way into data-driven drug discovery. So I'll just quickly highlight these 3 trends right away.
Oh, thank you very much, Amandeep, on that. And I know that your center is really producing quite some quality research on the topic. So maybe even if I can ask you to drop a link to your website in the chat, that could be quite appreciated for the audience to possibly dig deeper. Now, coming to Vida, you are a computer scientist. You also started a company basically on diagnostic methods for neurodegenerative diseases using technology. At the same time, you're an academic, yes? So you're at the intersection of these 2 worlds that I feel we can say that are extremely important to advance the use of AI for health. Now, how does the cooperation really unfold? How can we combine kind of the power of research happening at academic institutions with the agility of business together?
Like you said, these both institutions are really important to get a product on the market, but at the same time, they're so different then that it's really hard to combine both of them. But if you are enthusiastic enough, then it can be done. What is usually thought about the academia is that what we do is a basic research which cannot be then used in the industry. And that is where I think is the main problem, why more research is not actually then, let's say, exported to the industry and actually the products made on that. And that is one of the reasons that me, together with my colleagues, actually funded NEOS Diagnostics, where we can actually turn the research into a working product that also can be used in real life scenarios, and also that actually confirm with the regulatives for the medical devices. So it's not simple to be done, but I think that there's more and more opportunities where companies can use the research that's been made at in the academia and actually work on it to make better products or even new products that have not been done so far.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much, Vida, for that. You were, I presume, first academic, and then based on what you were working on in your research, you took the decision to set up your company. Can you just tell us very briefly a little bit about your concrete journey?
Yes, I was first the academic. I was a junior researcher at the AI lab at the University of Ljubljana, where I was doing my PhD on actually Parkinson's disease and making new models to diagnose Parkinson's disease. And then when I was finishing my PhD, I was looking on where to go next, right? Whether to stay in academia or go to the industry. And I found that maybe going into my own way, so entrepreneurial part, would be a good option. So we started NEWS, and actually the research that led to the product was made at the company, of course, with the support of the university, but it wasn't my PhD research that actually was then ended in the product, although it ended in the product, but not by NEWS. That's totally different story. Interesting as well, but yeah, this is my way.
No, thank you. It's always good to hear about the concrete journey. Now, turning to you, Catherine, to mix it up, our online and on-site dynamics. Now, of course, a totally new and exciting aspect in the use is the use of technologies in disabilities. Mm-hmm. Yes. So certainly innovations can help people overcome mobility. We have definitely further possibilities with accessibility, human-computer interaction, assistive technology. Now, what do you see as the main challenges, and where are the limits of how far assistive technologies can go?
Excellent question. So in terms of the limits, the International Research Centre of Artificial Intelligence, IRCAI, based in Slovenia, has joined forces with UCL in London with the Global Disability Innovation Hub to lay out a short policy briefing on this, to begin to look at what are the opportunities, because the opportunities are the flip side to the challenges, obviously. And within the disability movement, that's 15% of the population, and then you add maybe 15% of the population that are elderly, you get to 30% of the population. And the biggest challenges we're seeing are, firstly, that we've heard healthcare is accelerating, its use of tele-rehab, the use of telemedicine, the use of maybe algorithms to diagnose. Now we have to explain those to people, and we have to make sure that the mainstream technologies are inclusive of people with disabilities. So hearing impaired people, visually impaired people are able to access the same level of information and get hold of it. So that's the mainstreaming problem. Then you have the second problem, which is developing bespoke assistive technologies. So we've just heard about maybe trying to diagnose Parkinson's disease, for example. In the assistive technology world, so that's everything from wheelchairs to prosthetic limbs to hearing aids, as well as automatic speech recognition for people with motor neuron disease or ALS, we're finding that still the markets are fragmented. So when you go to speak to venture capitalists, when you speak to governments to invest into the core technologies, they think it's only a small proportion of the population because they're just looking at wheelchair users or they're just looking at prosthetic users. And one of the main things that we're trying to do through the AT 2030 program, which is funded by UKAID, both with IRCAI and GDI Hub, is to help companies begin that scale process. So we've invested in two companies, HearX and Peak. HearX for hearing aids, and looking at how HearX can scale their diagnostic tool to diagnose for hearing loss in Africa, but also introduce a new financing model around that. So how do you finance hearing aids in low and middle income countries? It's a genuine challenge. So investment into the space, I think, is the biggest challenge that we have at the moment, as well as making sure that mainstream technologies are disability and age inclusive.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. That's exciting and so useful work that you're trying to do and kind of push also the shift in thinking. So let's hope that we will get back to some of these aspects in the chat. But I would now turn, if you allow me, to Andreas. Now you are actually focusing on ethical aspects of technologies at the World Health Organization. Now, what are now, in the context of our discussion, of course, some of the biggest ethical issues that you're keeping your eye on, because a whole new world is unfolding here?
Yeah, thank you very much for that very important question. So first of all, I do want to stress that WHO strongly believes that AI and digital health holds great promise for clinical medicine, for research, as well as for public health, as we have already heard and seen on the slide as well. At the same time, there are a number of ethical and human rights issues that need to be carefully considered and addressed if we want to make this promise a reality, especially for the most vulnerable and underserved populations as well. So I will just enumerate a few key ethical issues that we have identified. The first is to assess whether AI should be used in the first place, meaning this has to do with cost effectiveness and also trade-offs with conventional, methods and modalities of providing healthcare, and whether it's really worth investing in this new technology, especially for LMICs. The second issue is the so-called digital divide, and this goes both countries and between countries, where what we can see is that there is a strong and important difference between not only different countries, but also within countries of who can actually access and use these new technologies. And that's something that we should really strive to overcome and make access possible for the greatest number. The third issue I want to mention is the data collection and the data use, which comes with a lot of potential privacy issues and the need for data protection, especially also across borders and countries. And then the final issue I want to mention for now is the potential for bias and discrimination. This has to do also with the data collection. What we have seen is that very often data are collected in a way that potentially excludes some population groups, and that in turn then leads to bias and potential discrimination of these groups in the application of these technologies. So it's very important to be very inclusive in the data collection, but also in the design of these technologies, to be including also vulnerable groups. And WHO has just published guidance in June on the ethics and governance of AI in health. And I'm happy to put the link to this document, which contains all these ethical issues in much more detail. Thank you.
Absolutely. Do share the link to the guidelines, Andreas. Thank you. And thank you, yes, for quite frank kind of complication of this issue further, yes, with bringing those further aspects. I will complicate it even further with the help of Ulrike. Yes, so Ulrike, you're from WIPO, so obviously my question to you will be in intellectual property rights domain. Now, of course, IP laws hold the potential to enable innovation, protect future developments and investments. Now, where again are the main potentials as well as challenges of IP in the topic that we are discussing today?
Thank you so much. And it's a wonderfully broad question, but it allows me to maybe set a little bit of the background for you. I will start with the challenge, but I think, as Kathy rightly said, the challenge very often is the counter side to the opportunity that we see. And if I had to condense it down to really the biggest challenge, the challenge we're facing is both the increasing technical complexity and also the rate of change of that complexity in the technology. And I think what Amandeep referred to in the 3 trends he sets highlight all of those. Because I know today we're talking about AI in health, but it's not just AI. It's a whole set of what I call frontier technologies. And really the way to describe them in my head is these are technologies that operate at the intersection of scientific breakthrough and real practical implementation. So there are things like robotics that are highly relevant, things like the Internet of Things, the human brain interface, neuroscience. And as I heard from a lot of the other speakers already, at the basis of all of that is the important question of data and big data that drives all of these technologies. On top of that, you of course have IP that is a very technical, specialized subject. And you have a rate of change within the technology that is increasing exponentially. So the biggest challenge that I see is that despite all of those complexities and very intricate, almost subject matter topics, we really need to make the topics of IP and technologies, including AI, accessible, understandable, and explainable to the widest set of people, to everyone. But of course, the other side and the upside to that is if we manage to do that, if we manage to have that wide discussion, explainability and accessibility, we can really make IP work for everyone, everywhere around the world. And that will be driving a huge wave of innovation. And to give you a fact that I find fascinating, I've seen one study that says frontier technologies, including AI, currently represent about a $350 billion market. That could grow to 3.2 trillion by 2025, so not even 5 years from now. So there is a huge upside to gain as long as we can make it accessible, understandable, and drive it with everyone forward.
No, thank you, Ulrike, especially for sharing some of the powerful figures with us. I can see that there is quite the dynamics in the chat, guessing from the number of interactions. So, Andriana, at this point, I would like to turn to you to give us a little summary of what has been discussed.
Thank you for the floor, Teresa. We have quite an attendance today, around 90 people. So far, we have shared resources in our chat. Our speakers shared a link to the GRM overview on IDAR.org and a recent panel at the Berlin World Health Summit. As promised, Andreas just shared the WHO guidance on ethics and governance of AI for health. I was just about to share 2 other resources from WIPO on IP and assistive tech and on AI and IP, which I will do as soon as I finish this intervention. And there was a comment from Eliza who said that this discussion is insightful, especially for physically challenged people. More work needs to be done in developing countries to achieve equitability. She also noted that to a larger extent, data is stored manually in Africa. That will be it for now. Teresa, a question is just coming in regarding diagnosing in the field of medical health. However, I don't have the question precisely at this moment. I guess we can wait a few more seconds to see the question from Liliane.
Let's do that. While we're waiting, yes, I mean, first of all, of course, excellent to have all those resources shared. Please do consult them. Some of the kind of keywords coming up in both the interventions of some of our speakers, but as well in the chat now to me seem the dimension of digital divide, affordability, investment. So these are some of the topics I would definitely like to bring up. Before we bring up the question, Andriana, from our participant, do any of our speakers want to react to other fellow speakers on anything, on any particular point? Catherine, would you?
Sure,
yes.
I'm happy to come back. I think when there's two things I was thinking about. One was when Vida was speaking about the interplay between academia and spin-outs and industry. I think that just like frontier tech is emerging and those figures that we're hearing, Ulrike, that they're quite staggering. I think academia is evolving too. And I think that we are no longer just people that collect knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And more and more we are looking to how we can provide practical applications, especially in relation to both the social development goals or sustainable development goals, but the social aspects of society, as well as the economic aspects. And I think that we're doing that increasingly. And within the disability space, there are an increasing number of innovations in that space, both in the diagnostic tools, in health data, as well as in assistive technologies themselves. So I think that's a very exciting point. And the other thing is around division. So, if we begin to think of those figures that you mentioned, Ulrike, that massive, trillions of dollars, will they further divide the world? That would be my question. Like, will frontier tech begin to make the richer, even within a rich nation or within a low or middle income nation, will the divisions become wider? And I think it's absolutely imperative on us to not let that be the case, to make sure that these technologies bring societies closer together.
Well, thank you very much for that, Catherine. Ulrike, would you like to react to Catherine's concern?
Yes, and it's a concern that is very valid and that is voiced often and rightly so. But I'd like to share an experience of WIPO held a virtual exhibition on AI and IP. That was the first virtual exhibition we ever held, and that was due to COVID, us pushing frontier technologies. But the reason I like to share is we try to bring the topic of AI and IP closer and make it understandable, the topic I was talking about, to get everyone involved in talking about it, and to have a real feel for the technology as well and what it means. And we reached out to people all around the globe, from the innovative sector to the creative sector. And there can be this perception that it's certain players, certain enterprises, certain regions that might be driving these technologies. But the big takeaway, and quite an optimistic takeaway from me, is the response that we got was we had examples of the use of AI as a technology on the creative sector from every single region of the world. And there were a lot of startups, medium, small enterprises that were really happy, willing to share their examples and what they're doing with us. So the hopeful message from my side is there is real potential for AI and frontier technologies to really benefit everyone, everywhere around the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ulrike, for that response. Andriana, can I go back to you quickly?
Yes, you can. We have decoded the question. It is, what is the speaker's view on using AI for diagnosing mental health? And what are the ethical issues that can arise from this? In the meantime, we have also received more questions. Didier would like to know, how could you share scientific data for health research? At the moment, even if you want to share this data, it is almost not possible. He notes the citizens who want to share their health data do not have any place where they can share for scientific research. And he asks, how can we change that? And another question that just came in, everyone is making my job so much harder, but please continue to do so, is given the fact that we face a number of challenges when using AI in health, such as regulatory, safety, ethical, what kind of effective governance model would you propose? What should be its main components or principles? Teresa, back to you.
Thank you, Andriana. It's not the last time we are having you in, so please feel free to use the chat further, and we will come back to further questions. Our other speakers, would you like to indicate to me if you would like to pick up one of the questions, either the more general one on AI for health or on scientific data sharing, or going to the tough one on effective governance models?
Yeah, maybe I can.
Yes, please.
I can venture. Firstly, on the digital divide issue, I think the deepest inequities are those around knowledge making. Who sets the research and development agenda? Who adds value through knowledge making? A lot of the world is not only shut off, doesn't have access to internet affordable devices, that part of the digital divide, but is just consumers of content and research done by a select few. I think our biggest challenge is looking at the future to make sure that AI and the use of data in research and development, in research and innovation, is open to more researchers from the global south. They have the tools, the infrastructure, the other enablers to be contributing not only to solving their national problems, but international and global challenges. Now, this brings me to this question from Didier on sharing scientific data for health research. So Didier, the answer is this is a hard problem. There are regulatory constraints like, clinical trials. You can use data only once for a particular purpose. You can't repurpose data for other kinds of discovery through AI and data. So some of the regulatory issues would have to change. But at the same time, we would have to find new ways of empowering patients and those who contribute their data so that they get visibility into the knowledge making, the value derived from that data. So it's not only about data protection, but it's also about data empowerment and knowledge empowerment. And we would also need to create communities of trust across researchers. It's not just clinical science, it's also computer science and AI, it's also public health. So we need to bring different disciplines together and find ways for them to collaborate in a trustworthy manner. So this is where some of us are trying to play the role of neutral convening platforms for this research to happen, along with neutral trusted infrastructures where that data can be stored if it is aggregated, or distributed research infrastructures if data stays sovereign and doesn't move out of the participating research participatory organizations. Thanks.
Thank you, Amandip, for that. Andreas, I could notice you unmuting before, so maybe we can go to you for your reactions.
Yes, thank you. I think I could pick up on the question regarding mental health and ethical issues. So first of all, mental health services tend to be quite resource intensive, meaning you often need to speak to a person for quite some time. And the fact is that in many countries, there's a big lack of qualified health care staff and psychiatrists in this case. And so there is a big gap to fill. And I believe that digital technologies and AI-aided technologies can help to bridge that gap. And what we've seen is the development, for example, of different chatbots in that area, which can be quite helpful especially for screening mental health issues. Some of the challenges there are certainly how to deal with false positives and negatives. What if the algorithm somehow, or the bot, doesn't interpret your answers correctly and sort of turns you away or doesn't refer you to adequate structures, which also, of course, have to be in place. And this is where the issue with accountability and responsibility comes in. So, who would be responsible if, let's say, a patient who is not diagnosed correctly by the chatbot or referred correctly, then, for example, commits suicide? Is it the chatbot developer? Is it the healthcare system which provided that? Is it maybe a hospital where this is recommended? So there are a lot of issues of accountability and responsibility in this area, which need to be taken very seriously. And then, of course, mental health issues, as some others, HIV and so forth, are highly stigmatized. So we would have to make sure that all these chats and all the data that is collected there are highly protected. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Andreas. To be honest, I am struggling a little bit to imagine some concrete use of AI for mental health. Yes, of course, this is not a topic of my expertise. So if any of our speakers have anything very concrete to share, please feel free to do so in the chat or ask for the floor. But that's just a curiosity question from me that I think that others who are not so kind of into this topic might help to clarify, because it's such an important field of medicine, but I'm struggling a little bit, yes, to imagine. Vida
has her hand up.
Yes,
so maybe
exactly. Vida, over to you, please.
Hi, thank you. So maybe first to answer your question regarding where AI can be used in mental health, there actually exists a chatbot for depression, right? So you can actually, it's an application you can download on your mobile phones. And then this chatbot actually helps you go through some issues that you might have. So let's say it looks what you're doing on your mobile phone. Then if he sees something is odd with what you are doing, it actually intervenes and asks you a question. How do you feel? How can I help? And maybe something like that. I know that application exists. I can find it online in a few minutes. So this is one possibility. Then the other is what we are actually, or our PhD student here at the University of Ljubljana is doing, also with the depression, is whether we can quantify the level of depression that a certain person has, and based on that, actually provides insight on the medication, whether a person has good medication levels, or he or she should get more antidepressives, less. If you are putting them off the antidepressives, if that is fine, how they are reacting to it, and so on. So this is answer to your question. And another one would be, no, sorry, my other comment actually went to the data sharing. When we are talking about medical data, we need to understand that not only data that is collected in the hospital is medical data. So every data that can be gathered from, let's say, smart watches or smartphones is also your medical data. And when you opt in for the use of, let's say, smartwatch, usually in that a lot of text that you agree, right? You also allow for sharing of that data so that the providers of the watch and the software can do research on the data, right? So this is one comment that I wanted to add. Sometimes we actually say, yeah, use my data for everything, but we don't even know that, or we don't really think of that as medical data. That is what I wanted to comment on. Thank you.
And it was very useful, your answers. Thank you very much, Vida, for that. Let's maybe take a quick poll, if I may. Now that we've heard so many things about the potential of AI and health. So if I may ask you, my dear colleagues, to put up the poll. So would you be able to trust artificial intelligence more than your physician? This is a little dramatic pause while we are waiting for the poll results to come in, but I think that the trend is quite clear, even if it's still moving. So actually the majority, clear majority, 70+ percent, 70% at this very moment of you don't think that you would be able to trust AI more than your physician. Would be great to hear from you, maybe in the chat why. I presume, because of course this is quite a simplified question. We are aware that this is a much more complex topic, so likely we would maybe like to see some kind of a combination and using the best of both. But thank you for participating here. Now, I would like to go to another kind of bracket that we haven't opened yet, and that is the topic of capacity development. Yes, of policymakers to be able to take informed decision. Catherine, you have mentioned some of the challenges, how it's difficult to make the case, with policymakers, for instance, with the investors. How would you take up this question? Who do we need to work with? Of course, on the, let's say, policy level, but I presume also getting the users of such technologies or us as beneficiaries of the health system to get used to the new reality that is also not going to happen overnight. So what to do with that? On the kind of training capacity development, maybe I start with you, Catherine.
Or maybe I'm sure that Ulrika in particular will have some interesting comments to make on this, but I wonder if, just as the poll showed, there's a balance between risk and sort of a threat that we feel and how much we trust something. And trust, as we all know, is built up over time, and it's built up through communication. And so the example I was going to give of mental health and AI was around banking. And like Vida said, not all data is health data. And actually your bank, if you're someone who has bipolar disorder, oftentimes your bank will know that you've entered a manic state before anybody else knows. And there are ways now, vulnerable banking groups that are beginning to look at how banks, the algorithms can be changed, and then your bank gets frozen, your partner, your representative that you give before you're in a manic episode is informed. And I think if we're able to use a little bit more of this hybrid language, it's not AI or humans, it's AI informed decision making. But then you get into the very difficult complications, which were very well presented earlier, which is around who owns that risk. So Andreas was talking about who owns the risk if something begins to go wrong, and we see the same problems in assistive technology. If a device is fitted, if your limb is fitted by a surgeon, the surgeon or the prosthetist signs off that limb. But if that limb was designed by an algorithm and it fails, who is at risk of that limb? So I think that we end up into that conversation, I think, around risk and trust. And in terms of who we have to inform everybody. Mm-hmm. It's an open conversation, and hopefully this is starting the conversation. But everything from policymakers to users to other researchers in different fields, right the way through to the public.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much, Catherine. That was useful. Amandeep, if I may maybe call on you, because I know that actually capacity development is one of the focus of the work of your organization. Is there something concrete that you could mention that your activities are focused on in the field of training, capacity development?
Sure.
And with whom are you actually working? Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of the governance, so we have two targets for capacity development. One is researchers and developers, and the other is the policymakers, the decision makers, the investors. And in the context of the latter, governance and regulatory issues are a key theme in our draft competency framework. We have developed a relational governance scheme that kind of is a whole systems life cycle approach, because it's not just the algorithm, it's also the data, the biases, the problems in the data, also the context. So where do you start the development of an autonomous intelligence system, and how is it benchmarked? So it's a kind of an end-to-end capacity issue that we are dealing with. Part of the issue is that regulators are using tools and paradigms from the earlier era. So regulating software as medical devices, it's a nice kind of transition from the existing look at safety and liability issues, but essentially misses the point about the different way in which some of these solutions, purported solutions, work. So we need a new paradigm, and we are working to build a networked capacity for delivering some of the training, some of the use cases, because often you see that in the developed world, you don't have use cases in the population health or public health type of a setting. Those things are more available from the global south. So you need a global capacity to also pull together the content and the use cases and deliver it through something that we call a global school for digital health and AI in health. And we invite partners to work with us. And there are some partners who've done amazing work with the COVID response using just Zoom to train health workers in emergency response, handling of diagnostics, etc. So there's an exciting potential out there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Amandi, for that. Also for the invitation for others to get involved. I am checking for raised hands. Do not see any. So if you allow me, I would like to go to Andriana because the number flashing on my screen is 62 interactions at this moment.
Well, as I said, my job is getting harder and harder by the minute. I'll try my best to summarize the main points from the latest interactions we've had. We spoke about making health data available, and Marie noted that in France, health data is automatically available for public research unless you opt out. And Amandeep jumped in the chat to add that Finland is also among the countries enabling the secondary use of health data. Didier, however, noted that legal constraints are indeed a big problem, but this should change because at this moment, he notes, health data is often sold by institutions. And Johan jumped in to say that one of the key questions linked to health and AI is the ownership of data, because today there are a few companies that are collecting the majority of data. But in the health sector, it is both companies and the state that have a lot of data. So do you see a change needed and a clarification on how to own data? And if some data are personal and thus should be owned and controlled by the individual? Or can health data become a more common global good? Didier noted that his ideal solution is to create a system that is trusted by citizens, managed by a public institution, where by default, all health data can be used for scientific research. In his opinion, Finland is not very far away from this, and he would like to hear thoughts about this possible solution. Marie also noted that the European health data space is probably one of the topics of the French EU presidency coming up next January. Didier, however, believes that this process is too slow. The process to have an authorization to access data for scientists is incredibly slow, so that is a flaw of the system. And after we ran the poll, it caused an avalanche of reactions in the chat. They're all reflecting the result of the poll, which is that AI can assist the primary physician, but it cannot be the primary physician on its own, as it is the doctor that is familiar with the patient's history and can give the care part of the healthcare. Back to you, Teresa.
Thank you very much, Andriana. Actually, the poll calmed me down a little bit because a new trend, it's a side note, but for instance, how can you use AI for like holistic medicine approaches, something that is, coming up so much more, and there is a shift in the field of medicine. Mm-hmm. So, yes, I'm skeptical. I do hope that we can use AI and data to kind of smoothen out the work of physicians, but I still do hope that I will talk to a real doctor, or I do hope that a real doctor will deliver real babies. And yes, I just hope that there are some limits in this discussion. But few keywords from the chat. Health data availability, health data ownership keeps coming up. Legal constraints keep coming up. Now, if I may twist a little bit the question, something that we have not covered yet. The huge concentration of data leads to some concerns also in the field of cybersecurity. Yes, so would any of our speakers like to maybe elaborate briefly on that aspect? And please either unmute yourself or raise your hand. Nobody wants to get in this field, it seems. which is fine as well. Yes, Amandi, yes, thank you.
Maybe drawing on a previous life in the international security field. I think we've seen some serious breaches in Singapore, UK, some other places, and these are countries you can't say are lax about cybersecurity. They take it very seriously, have high standards. So the attack surface is expanding with more types of data for health being available and increase in the sheer number of users. So this is going to be a serious problem in the future and is a potential impediment to collaboration around data. So an effort is needed to raise the level of security awareness, to raise harmonization of efforts, and to actively track the threats out there. There have been some attempts during the pandemic to say, this should be considered out of bounds in terms of cyber attacks, but unfortunately, we can't convince everyone of that. So defense would have to be prioritized, and most importantly, those moving into data and AI use in the health space would have to do security by design. So just as for nuclear reactors, we do security by design, there is DBT type of approach to building nuclear reactors today. That was not the case with the earlier generation of reactors. So we would have to move to building health facilities with cybersecurity by design, health data infrastructures with security by design. Thanks.
Thanks, Amandeep, for taking that up. Now, as we are slowly approaching the last few minutes of our event, I would kind of like to bring it home in the sense that I explained that these are reflections from Geneva, and we've heard from actors based here in Geneva and the work they've been doing, of course, from you, Amandeep and IRCAI, but also from WIPO and the WHO. Now, question to the three of you, and starting with Andreas. What added value Geneva and the policy making happening here can bring to this discussion?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So first of all, Geneva is really the hub for the UN organizations, and we have a number of them, not only on this panel, but also others like the ITU, and WHO and ITU have a very strong partnership already on AI, but there are also, of course, the academic institutions like the University of Geneva, but also the Graduate Institute and many others that really form an important hub taken together. And I think it's really a unique setting in that sense that it brings together not only first-rate academic institutions, but also many international organizations as well as NGOs. And this is, I think, the big comparative advantage of Geneva. Over.
Thank you, Andreas. Going to you, Ulrike, please.
Sure, thanks. Trying to pull some of the wonderful arguments and discussions and interventions I've heard together, and staying with an example, I think what we've all heard today is the importance of data and the questions of data in AI for health and for other things. But I think what we've all heard, and I like the question about cybersecurity, is that data itself, when you look at it, raises so many different policy areas and questions. It's security, it is ethics, it's in health, for example, it is maybe competition law in data concentration. It certainly is IP and data. And for me, the really wonderful thing is, and it also goes to the question of who do you have to bring around the table, and how I started by saying it's all of these complexities, actually having the opportunity to have all of these different facets, because it's so important that in the work that we do, we are aware of the implications and the interactions with other fields. And I think Geneva is very unique in providing a basis for that.
Thank you very much, Ulrike, and Amandeep, to you and the role of your center or academic institution you're representing.
Yeah, so I think Geneva has all these international organizations and academia, but it also has a connotation in terms of a neutral convening space. So from humanitarian action to international education, the IB program, we've seen that in a few areas. So I would see Geneva as a platform, larger platform for all these organizations and their partners to come together to create a transdisciplinary community that can advance AI and data use in health in a responsible, inclusive, and impactful manner. So IDEAR is trying to contribute to that opportunity. We have collaboration with the WHO, which is represented here. We have a budding collaboration with the ITU and others. I think collaboration is the way to go, because no single organization has all the answers. And this is something we saw with the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation. Digital requires us to be nimble and more creative in terms of partnerships, working across silos. And Geneva provides us an excuse to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amandeep, to you as well. The fact that the partners involved in preparing this series together are mostly based in Geneva, except for IRCAI, of course, the missions of Switzerland, Slovenia, the EU delegation. Of course, it's no coincidence, because we really are convinced that Geneva has something to bring to the table. So thanks also for bringing your reflections on that. Now, Adriana, last quick stop with you for the very last time, because then we will have to wrap up.
Thank you, Teresa. I do have a question that I promised that I will bring in if I had the time. So I'm going to keep my promise, and if the panelists would like to answer it briefly, if you think that's okay, that's up to you. Maria asked about the availability of medical data for AI developers, because GDPR allows secondary use of medical data for scientific research, but to use it for AI development, you need consent. And she asked, what is the possible way to solve this problem? We also had some interesting examples about cybersecurity and Belgium, in the sense that it might be for a bad actor easier with a big data bank than with small ones, but not in all aspects. This came from Didier, and I'd bring it back to you, Teresa. Nothing else from my side.
Thank you, Adriana. So I consider the letter rather as further information complementing our discussion, but the first is clearly a question about consent with the use of data. Would any of our speakers like to pick it up quickly? Please give me a sign. And I can see Andreas, please.
Yeah, this is an extremely tricky question. We only have 3 minutes on the watch, but there are different modalities for consent. The normal one is the individual informed consent, but then we also have so-called broad consent for research or data use, and then also blanket consent. And there are various discussions on the different modalities. So I can put something in a link if that's okay, so we can move on to the other question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for that. And I'm checking if any of our speakers would like to make some quick last intervention. And if not, which seems to be the case, I would like to finish this event by inviting you to the last session that we will have in the series From Geneva, Reflections on Digital Future, that will take place just before Christmas on 15th December, again in a hybrid format, and will be dedicated to the issue of technology and development. So again, quite an important topic that we will try to unpack, and that last event will also serve as a kind of summary of the discussions that we've had in the 3 previous events in the series. This discussion was recorded. The recording will be publicly available, so feel free to refer to the session also later, or share with others who might find it interesting. I would once again like to thank all of our speakers for coming, either virtually or physically, for very stimulating discussions. I would like to thank Adriana for excellent co-moderation, and of course our partners and the whole team behind the scenes that made it work quite smoothly together. I wish you a very nice afternoon, and see or see you soon. Bye-bye.